are rescheduled for today, March 4th. I'm going to start off tonight's presentation just by talking a little bit about reviewing some of our district priorities. Just really quickly, we are looking to create safe, welcome spaces socially and emotionally for all of our students and staff. We're looking to improve instructional programs at all times and prioritize students first. Increase innovative learning spaces across the district, include professional development that's research-based for our staff, and also maintain a safe, clean, and energy efficient building and facilities. We also are encouraging and looking to enhance parent collaboration across the district with all these different types of priorities. A few executive budget highlights. On January 20th, the governor gave her initial budget proposal. And within that proposal, there's an increase to state aid of about $1.6 billion in the state, which is an increase of about 4.3%. That's an increase of 3% in foundation aid. Districts on Save Harmless will receive a minimum 1% increase in foundation aid. So that does apply to us in West Islip. We are a Save Harmless district, which basically means that you would receive the same amount of foundation aid that you received in the previous year, which is helpful for long-term planning. There's also a proposed 40% increase in UPK aid. So if you recall, we previously have received $5,400 per student. There's a call for an increase there to $10,000 per student. And also the cap has been lifted so that while we initially received funding for 213 students and recently transitioned to a wait list for students who went above that number 213, the governor's new proposal does allow us to fund a pre-K program for every student that does apply. We're in the process of working this out currently with South Shore Children's Center, one of our partners, our CDO that we work with, and seeing how we are hopefully going to be able to make that work for the upcoming school year. I know that that's a goal for us to get any student who is applying for pre-K covered by this grant funding and able to attend over at South Shore for next year. There's a little bit of planning that goes into that, but we are trying to make that work. Districts are being given a little bit of flexibility for the coming years. However, in 28-29, as you can see, that is something that they'd be looking to mandate in New York State, that any student districts would have to find a way to make it work if they were allocating that grant funding. One really important note that I know Mrs. Pilati is going to talk about tonight in a moment is that our state aid in West Islip is projected to increase by $370,000, which is just over 1%. I just want to share that, that is the initial proposal of what we're slated to receive now. We hope that that number will improve. I was up in Albany this week advocating with the governor's office for districts. I think it's about 80% of districts across New York are at that 1% increase in state aid. And with staying within the 2% tax cap, which we have in West Islip since its inception, it is really challenging to fund all existing programs or expand when you receive a lower number of state aid like that and stay within that 2% tax cap. So with that, I would like to hand it over to Mrs. Pilati, who will be discussing our district budget goals.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Romanelli. So consistent with our previous years, our budget goals are always to maintain a budget that is both fiscally responsible and operationally efficient. We always strive to preserve and enhance our student programs and services while staying within the limits of the tax cap. We also ensure financial transparency by providing community members with access to key documents such as our internal and external audit documents and reports, our monthly financial statements, the district's reserve plan, as well as our SED required transparency reports, which are all available on our district's website. As we go through the budget development process, supporting documentation and the presentations that we deliver each night will be available on our district's website. Tonight marks the first of 4 budget workshops where the board and the administration will review and discuss the budget development. Each year, the budget development process begins in the fall. We start by analyzing expenditure trends and projecting costs based on historical data, as well as contractual obligations and industry forecasts. At this time, we also review anticipated staffing needs, program requirements, and service levels across the district. By late November, Building and department administrators all submit their proposed budgets to central office, and then we have internal budget meetings to examine each request and align them with our district priorities as well as our fiscal realities. In January, as Dr. Romanelli mentioned, the governor releases the executive budget proposal. That's our first indication of our projected state aid. And throughout February and March, the Board of Education reviews and discusses these budget decisions and workshops in each of our 4 different nights. So once the state adopts its final budget in April, the board will formally adopt the district's proposed budget. And this is followed by the public budget hearing in May, and then ultimately the community will vote on the annual budget on May 19th. Since the tax cap was enacted back in 2012, our budget formula follows a very straightforward path. We start by calculating a restricted tax levy for the district, which is the portion of the budget that is funded by the local property taxes under the tax cap. We then add in any state aid, any other revenues, and appropriated fund balance, and any use of our district's reserves. The total of all of those components gives us the district's expenditure budget for the year. The tax levy limit, as I mentioned, has been in effect since the 2012-13 school year. It allows districts to increase their property tax levy from one year to the next by 2% or the rate of inflation, whichever is less. The calculation is based on a multi-step formula that is provided by the Office of the State Comptroller. There are various adjustments and exclusions to the formula. And if a district chooses to exceed the calculated limit, that's considered piercing the tax cap, and it requires a supermajority vote by the community. West Islip has never pierced the tax cap before. Our tax levy limit calculation is due to New York State by March 1st, and it was submitted last week on February 25th. So this slide shows our district's proposed tax levy. I know it's small, probably hard to read, but I'll take you through it. So we begin with our prior year tax levy, which is up here, the $96,265,976. That simply represents the total amount of property tax revenue that was levied for this current school year, 25-26. You then have to apply your tax-based growth factor. This represents growth in the district's taxable property value. Unfortunately for us, this number stayed very low this year. It's the lowest it can be, which is 1.0. So meaning we really didn't have any growth. We then add in any pilot payments that are receivable in the current year. Pilot stands for payments in lieu of taxes. It's simply an agreement where a property owner makes a negotiated annual payments, usually for a period of 10 years, instead of traditional property taxes. And in West Islip, we have one pilot, which is the veterinary office on Sunrise Highway. From there, we subtract the portion of the tax levy that was used to support capital costs. So this number here is our capital exclusion, and this box here basically takes you through the calculation of how we get to the capital exclusion for this current school year and the next school year. So that box on the right breaks down those capital exclusions, which include debt service on our voter-approved projects, bus purchases, installment purchase debt, which is our Chromebook financing, and our share of the BOCES capital expenditures. And all of these amounts here are netted with the BOCES aid, transportation aid, and the building aid. After adjusting for those capital exclusions, we have to apply the allowable levy growth factor, which I mentioned has to be either the rate of inflation or 2%, whichever is less. So the rate of inflation was 2.63% this year. So unfortunately, we have to just use the 2% because it's capped at 2%. So we then subtract out the pilot payments that we expect to get next year, the $115,000, and any capital, again, the same capital exclusions, $3.7 million. And what you're left with is that $98.7 million. That is our expected allowable levy limit for next year, which represents an increase of 2.5%. So just to summarize, this year compared to last year, which is our current school year, the tax levy for 26-27, we're looking at a projected increase of $2.4 million or 2.5%. Our goal each year is to present a balanced budget where our revenues match our expenditures. However, achieving the balance becomes increasingly challenging because of many of our costs that are rising faster than inflation and our available revenues. Health insurance, for example, operates on a calendar school year, while our district operates, on a calendar year, while our district operates on a fiscal year. So we have to budget across two separate rate periods. For 2026, Empire NYSHIP rates increased 8.79% for family plans and 8.92% for individual plans. The rates for the second half of the 26-27 school year have not yet been established, so we have conservatively budgeted a 10% increase in those rates. That alone represents a very significant expenditure driver. Our general liability insurance through NYSER is projected to increase approximately 12% again, which is another substantial cost escalation. Employer pension contributions are also rising. ERS rates, Employee Retirement System contribution rates, are increasing from 19.4% to 21.4%, and that directly impacts our payroll-related expenditures. Luckily, TRS system is seeing a decrease in their rates. So this current school year, we're at 9.59% of a contribution rate to TRS. That's actually going down for our district next year, and all districts in New York State, to 8.24%. So that was one positive. Transportation costs continue to escalate as well. Next year, we will be in year 4 of a 5-year agreement that we have with Suffolk Transportation. And of course, there are contractual increases that are built into that RFP and contract. Special education costs, programs, and services continue to grow in both student needs and placement intensity. These are mandated services that are legally required to be provided, and they represent a very significant and often unpredictable cost area. We are budgeting also for charter school tuition. Under New York State law, districts are actually required to pay a set tuition per student that is attending a charter school that lives in your district. Based on what we currently know, we are projecting for students, which we currently have, at approximately $17,000 per student. So again, that number is just an estimate based on what we know now, but that number can also increase. But that represents about $75,000 in our budget. Finally, step salary movement and contractual obligations are built into our expenditure base. We have 3 collective bargaining agreements, nurses, teaching assistants, and operations, that are expiring June 2026. So we have built in responsible assumptions into the budget to account for any future contract changes. When you combine all of these factors listed here on the left, it's pretty clear that our expenditures are growing at a pace well beyond inflation. On the revenue side, our flexibility is extremely limited. Approximately 94% of our operating revenue comes from just 2 sources. We have state aid, which is only about 25%, and we have property taxes, which is about 69%. This means we have very little ability to generate new revenue outside of those 2 areas. The tax levy limit allows for growth, as I mentioned, it's just the lesser of 2% or the rate of inflation. And again, that's limiting us on how much we can raise our levy each year. And state aid is essentially flat. As you saw, we have just over a 1% increase. So this really creates a structural imbalance where our costs are rising faster than our revenues. We're not alone. I think all districts in New York State are facing these challenges, and we're trying to manage this gap responsibly. To maintain program stability and continue progressing toward a balanced budget, we are going to rely on reserves heavily again this school year, while aggressively monitoring our expenditures and identifying efficiencies wherever possible. For 2026-27, we are going to have 2 board trustee seats that will be open, and the nominating petitions for those seats are now available at district office. Our next 3 budget workshops will be March 10th, 24th, and April 16th here in the Beach Street Auditorium. We will be discussing curriculum and instruction at our next budget workshop. Then the 3rd one, we'll be going to cover buildings and grounds, capital reserve plan, and expenditures, and school safety. And at our last one, hopefully we will have a final proposed budget that covers all revenue and expenditures. The nominating petitions for the board trustee seats that I mentioned are actually due back to district office by April 20th, and we will be adopting our budget on April 21st. The public budget hearing will take place on May 5th, and of course, most importantly, May 19th is the budget vote, and that takes place at the high school gymnasium between 7 a.m. and 9 p.m. Does anyone have any questions on the material I provided, or?
No, thank you, Ms. Pilati. Just a general comment, as we know, we enter budget season. When we look at our tax cap, we always maintain under the tax cap of 2%. But if you think about how inflation has affected all of us over the last 5 or 6 years, where the average rate of inflation over that time has been well over 5%, Ms. Pilati and the group have done a great job to try to manage to that. But there is a breaking point where we are actually, having to look at other options in terms of where we can save more money. I know your team is doing that. We'll talk about that in the next few budget workshops, but we appreciate that. But it's just a level set. You can't continuously increase prices on everything and maintain a 2% tax cap, which we will this year as well, but we'll get there. So thanks for the explanation.
You're welcome.
All right, that concludes our budget workshop. We'll jump right into our Board of Ed planning meeting. So to end that meeting, we'll start the next meeting. If anyone would like to stand for the pledge once again. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thanks, everybody. Welcome to the budget, the Board of Ed planning session, which was rescheduled because of the storm on February 24th.